Hollywood 1988 thrived on a diet of neon and noise. It was a town that had forgotten how to listen, preferring the roar of a box office opening to the whisper of a closing chapter. But on one quiet May evening, in the most public of spaces, an entire nation would relearn the sound of silence. It was not an empty silence, but a profound, aching quiet, the kind that follows a truth so devastating and beautiful that it momentarily stops the world. This is not merely the story of an interview. It is the story of a delayed confession, a 25-year-old secret carried like a hidden heartbeat by one of the world's most famous men. It is about two icons standing at the summit of American entertainment who were secretly tethered by a single, forgotten hour in the dark. And it is about the moment that hidden tether finally snapped into view, not with a shout, but with a tearful whisper that recalibrated the meaning of friendship and salvation. Our story lives in two times, the glittering, desperate Hollywood of 1963 and the twilight of 1988. It connects through a bar, a bottle, and two men who, at their lowest points, accidentally became each other's lifeline. One remembered everything, the other remembered nothing, and their final, public reunion would become a masterclass in the invisible threads that hold us together. Act I, The Gathering Twilight, May 13, 1988. The NBC studios in Burbank hummed with a different frequency on that spring evening. There was a technical, rehearsed energy, cameras being tested, microphones leveled, cue cards stacked. But beneath the standard procedure flowed an undercurrent of palpable dread and reverence. Veteran crew members, people who had witnessed decades of celebrity traffic, moved with a hushed solemnity. Makeup artists checked their kits repeatedly, not out of routine, but from nervous energy. A stagehand adjusted a chair for the 10th time, his movements slow and deliberate. Tonight's guest was Dean Martin. The name itself conjured a universe of imagery, the effortless crooner, the cocktail-in-hand comedian, the unflappable center of the Rat Pack's hurricane. He was the king of cool, a man who built a legendary career on the persona of relaxed, unassailable charm. But the man scheduled to walk out onto that stage was a specter of that legend. The industry whispers were a grim chorus. His health was failing, his spirit shattered by the unspeakable tragedy of his son Dino's death in a military plane crash just 16 months prior. He was, by all accounts, a vessel of pure grief. In his dressing room, Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late night, prepared not for a show but for a vigil. His producer had delivered the blunt prognosis earlier. "He's not well, Johnny. He's frail. This isn't the Dean we know. This might be a farewell." Carson, a man who built his empire on controlled wit and impeccable timing, was left with no quip. He simply nodded, dismissed everyone, and sat in the quiet gloom. His relationship with Dean Martin was an anomaly in the transactional landscape of show business. It was not a network-engineered friendship or a publicity alliance. Dean had appeared on Carson's couch over 40 times, more than any other star. Their bond was woven from mutual respect and a shared understanding of the peculiar loneliness that lives inside the spotlight. Dean once told a reporter, "Carson's the only one in this whole phony town who never asked me for a damn thing. He just lets me be Dino." In an environment where everyone wanted a piece of Dean Martin, a song, a cameo, an endorsement, a favor, Johnny Carson only wanted his company. That rarity was the bedrock, but even Johnny didn't know the true foundation lay buried in the past, in the soil of a shared, desperate night he himself could not recall. Across the hall, in a dressing room that felt too large, Dean Martin sat. His daughter Gail had pleaded with him just hours before, "Daddy, please, you don't have to do this, we can go home." But Dean, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow that terrified her, had taken her hand. His voice was paper-thin but firm. "I have to, baby. I never told him. I never told Johnny what he did. If I go without telling him, I can't." The what was a mystery to her. It was the secret he had guarded for 25 years, a private, sacred debt that now, facing his own mortality, demanded payment. Act II, Ghosts in the Formosa, August 1963. To understand the weight of that secret, we must dissolve the image of the unshakable Dean Martin. Rewind 25 years. It is August 1963. The Beatles are yet to conquer America, Kennedy is in the White House, and Hollywood's golden age is curdling under the pressures of a changing culture. Dean Martin, at the peak of his fame, is secretly in freefall. His marriage to Jean is a public fiction masking private devastation, crumbling under the weight of fame, distance, and despair. She has left, taking their young children. He has not seen them in weeks, and the silence in his mansion is a physical torture. Professionally, the studio system that once adored him is shifting. He feels deemed outdated, a relic. His film contract is dropped. The message is clear: Dean Martin is finished. The persona of the carefree crooner becomes a cruel, suffocating costume. The man inside is drowning. On one particularly hollow night, the darkness wins. He sits in the oppressive quiet of his home, a bottle of bourbon his only companion. He writes letters to his children, to Jean, full of a love he feels he has failed to manifest. He is, in every sense, preparing an exit. He makes a decision, one last drink, for old time's sake, at a place he once loved, before he enacts his final, terrible plan. That place is the Formosa Cafe, a dim, wood-paneled haven on the outskirts of Hollywood, where the shadows were deep enough to hide a multitude of sins. Meanwhile, a young, painfully nervous Johnny Carson is drowning in a different way. He has just taken the helm of The Tonight Show, stepping into shoes he feels are 10 sizes too big. The pressure is astronomical. The critics are skeptical. Every joke feels like a high-wire act without a net. He is convinced, utterly, that he is a fraud about to be exposed on national television, that the network has made a catastrophic mistake. He, too, seeks refuge in the Formosa's shadows, sitting alone at the bar, wrestling with the decision to call his agent in the morning and quit everything. Fate, in its strange mercy, places them side by side. Dean Martin, the epitome of success, slumps onto the stool next to a terrified Johnny Carson. No entourage, no cameras, just two men stripped of their titles, anonymous in their despair. They drink, they talk, not as icon and host, but as two shattered souls speaking a language of quiet, shared ruin. Dean doesn't reveal his plan, Johnny doesn't reveal his terror of failure. They simply are together in the dark. As the night bleeds into early morning, Johnny, emboldened by drink and the strange comfort of shared misery, says the words that will unknowingly alter the course of history. He looks at Dean, the man who always seemed untouchable, and says, "Look at you. Your whole world's falling apart, and you can still walk in here and make everyone believe you're okay. If Dean Martin can do that, hell, maybe I can get through tomorrow's show after all. You're the reason I think I might make it." In that moment, Johnny Carson isn't offering salvation. He's asking for it. He's looking at Dean not as a solution, but as evidence that survival is possible. And for Dean, that unconscious plea is a lifeline. Someone saw him, not the star but the broken man. And in seeing him, they needed him. To be needed is to have a reason to exist. Dean Martin left the Formosa Cafe that night, tore up the letters, and chose to fight. Johnny Carson walked into his studio the next day and did his show. Neither spoke of it again. For Johnny, it faded into the blur of a nervous early career. For Dean, it became the secret cornerstone of his survival. Act III, the last performance. Back in 1988, the stage lights of The Tonight Show bloomed to life. The audience, buzzing with anticipation, fell into a tense hush as the announcer's voice boomed. Dean Martin emerged from the wings. The collective intake of breath was audible. This was not the man from the album covers. Time and grief had sculpted a new, fragile version. His trademark tuxedo hung on a frame diminished by sorrow. His walk was a careful, slow-motion version of his once insouciant saunter. He seemed to be concentrating on the simple act of moving forward. For a harrowing second, the illusion threatened to collapse entirely. Then the first notes of Everybody Loves Somebody swelled from Doc Severinson's band. It was more than a song, it was an incantation, and something miraculous happened. Dean's spine straightened almost imperceptibly. His chin lifted. He turned to the audience, and with a willpower that must have been Herculean, delivered the wink. That legendary, effortless gesture, it was a ghost, a perfect echo of his former self, and it broke the room open. The applause that erupted was not applause. It was a wave of collective emotion, love, gratitude, grief, and goodbye crashing over the stage. Johnny Carson, defying every protocol of his own show, stood up and walked around his desk. He met Dean halfway, wrapping him in an embrace that was long, tight, and spoke of decades of unspoken understanding. When they parted, both men's eyes were glistening. "Dean Martin, ladies and gentlemen," Johnny said, his voice uncharacteristically thick. "Welcome home." The first segment was a delicate dance of nostalgia. Dean, the consummate professional, slipped into the old stories. He talked about Frank's temper, Sammy's genius, the chaotic, glorious mess of the Rat Pack years. He even feigned taking a sip from his ever-present glass, which, the crew knew, held apple juice. The audience laughed, clinging to the normalcy, but it was a performance within a performance. Every anecdote was a carefully wrapped gift, offered with a steady hand that belied the tremor waiting beneath. Then came the turn. Johnny, aiming for a sweet, reflective note, asked, "Dean, looking back on this incredible life, all the laughter, what's the memory you treasure the most? What's the one that sticks with you?" The air changed. Dean's affable smile dissolved, not into sadness, but into a profound, focused seriousness. The charming facade fell away, revealing the raw man beneath. He carefully set his glass down on the desk, the click echoing in the sudden quiet. He looked at Johnny, not as a host, but as a confessor. "Johnny," Dean began, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that forced the entire studio to lean in. "Can I tell you something? Something I never told nobody. Not Frank, not Sammy, not even my kids." The studio was now a cathedral of silence. Johnny's demeanor shifted from professional host to concerned friend. "Of course, Dean, anything." Dean took a visible, shaky breath, steeling himself. "You know, I lost my boy, my dino." The name hung in the air, a sacred, painful relic. 16 months ago, he let the weight of that settle over the millions watching. "But that's not why I came here tonight." He paused, his eyes locking onto Johnny's with an almost physical intensity. "I came here to tell you why I didn't die 25 years before he did." Act IV, the confession. You could hear a pin drop in the studio. 18 million Americans collectively held their breath. Dean Martin was not just sharing a memory, he was dismantling his own myth, brick by brick, in real time. He took Johnny and the world back to the Formosa Cafe. He painted the picture of his own desolation in 1963, the failed marriage, the lost children, the abandoned career, the bottomless bottle of bourbon. He spoke of the letters written, the decision made. He did not use graphic language, but the implication was horrifyingly clear. He was describing the planning of his own end. "I went for one last drink," he whispered, the microphone catching every heartbreaking crack in his voice. "The Formosa, and you were there, Johnny. You were sitting at that bar, this skinny kid, looking more scared than anyone I'd ever seen." On screen, Johnny Carson's face began a slow, devastating collapse. The professional mask disintegrated, revealing a man processing a seismic truth in real time. His hand rose to cover his mouth. "We drank," Dean continued, tears now tracing paths through his makeup. "Two guys just fallen apart together, and at the end of the night you said something to me." Here, Dean's voice broke completely. He struggled for composure, gripping the edge of the desk. "Do you remember what you said?" Johnny, unable to speak, could only shake his head, his own eyes overflowing. "You said, Dean, I don't know if I'm gonna survive this job, but if Dean Martin can walk into a room and make everyone believe everything's fine when his whole world is collapsing, then maybe I can too. You're the reason I think I might make it." Dean let the words hang, heavy and sacred, in the silence. "You had no idea, Johnny, no idea what I was planning to do that night. But you looked at me like I still mattered." He reached out, gripping Johnny's forearm across the desk, a physical connection anchoring the emotional tsunami. "I tore up those letters, I fought for my kids, I got my life back, all because of that night. You saved my life, Johnny, and you never even knew it." The studio was a portrait of unabashed human emotion. Crew members wept openly. Audience members clutched each other's hands. Johnny Carson, the master of composure, was utterly shattered. He folded forward, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a full 30 seconds, an eternity in live television, there was no sound but the raw evidence of one man's grief and another's world being remade. When Johnny finally looked up, his face was ravaged, red, and utterly real. "Dean," he choked out, the word barely audible, I have to tell you something too." Act V, the mutual salvation. Dean, expecting comfort, looked confused. Johnny wiped his eyes, struggling to form the words. "That night at the Formosa," Johnny began, his voice a ragged whisper. "I remember it now, God, I remember it." He took a shuddering breath. I wasn't just scared, Dean. I was done. I was going to quit. I had my resignation written in my head. I was going to call the network the next morning and walk away from all of it. I was convinced I was going to fail in front of the entire country. He looked at his friend, decades of camaraderie flashing in his tear-filled eyes. And then you walked in, Dean Martin, the coolest man on the planet, and you sat down next to me, and you looked just as lost as I felt. A sob escaped him. And I thought, if he can feel like this and still get up every single night and make the whole world smile, then maybe being terrified isn't a good enough reason to quit. Johnny reached out and gripped Dean's hands in his, completing the circle. You saved me that night too, Dean. We saved each other, and we never said a word. The revelation was absolute. Two legends, two pillars of American culture, had been secretly propping each other up for a quarter century, each believing they were the sole beneficiary of a forgotten mercy. The interview was no longer an interview. It was an absolution. It was a testament to the invisible, silent ways we keep each other human. Dean stared at Johnny, a sound escaping him that was half disbelieving laugh, half sob of release. 30 years, he breathed. 30 years we've been friends, and neither of us ever said a damn word. Johnny, still holding Dean's hands, turned partially toward the camera, speaking not as a host, but as a man who had just witnessed a fundamental truth. Everybody watching, he said, his voice gaining a new, passionate strength. You hear that? We walk around every day convinced we're alone, convinced our pain is unique, that nobody gets it. But that night, two broken men sat at a bar and kept each other alive, without even knowing it. Dean nodded, turning as well, his message simple and direct. You never know who's watching you, who needs to see you keep going. That stranger next to you, that friend who seems just fine, they might be fighting a war you can't see. And you just being there might be the only thing keeping em in the fight. The audience rose as one. They did not applaud immediately. They stood in a tearful, silent tribute before the sound of their emotion broke into a thunderous, cathartic ovation. It was a moment of pure, unvarnished humanity, more powerful than any rehearsed punchline or staged stunt. Epilogue: the bar, next lifetime. When it was time to leave, Johnny carefully helped Dean from his chair, his arm a firm support around his friend's back. They walked slowly toward the wings, a final, physical manifestation of the support they had given each other for decades. At the very edge of the stage, just before he would disappear from the public eye forever, Dean stopped. He turned back, looking at Johnny under the bright lights one last time. Johnny, he called out, his voice clear and strong, carrying through the studio. Thank you for seeing me that night, when I couldn't see myself anymore. Johnny, his composure finally gone for good, could only manage a shattered, beautiful reply. Thank you, Deans, for showing me I wasn't the only one who was afraid. A smile, the last true Dean Martin smile, touched his lips. The old sparkle flickered in his eyes one final time. Same time, he said. Same bar, next lifetime, Pally. Johnny Carson, through his tears, smiled back. I'll be there, I promise I'll be there. Dean Martin walked off the stage and into history. He passed away on Christmas Day, 1995. Johnny Carson was a pallbearer at his funeral. In his eulogy, Carson said, Dean taught me the most important lesson. We are all walking around, saving each other, and most of the time we don't even know it. That stranger you smile at, that friend you check on, you might be the only reason they're still here. The 1988 interview became a cultural touchstone, a masterclass in vulnerability. Mental health organizations reported a dramatic, nationwide spike in calls in the following weeks, dubbed the Dean Martin effect. People were inspired to reach out, to confess, to connect, reminded by a legend that even the strongest facades can hide the deepest pain. Johnny Carson referenced that night for the rest of his career. In his own final interview, he reflected, Dean changed me. He taught me that every single conversation matters. Every moment you choose to really see someone, to show up, that might be the moment that saves their life. And you'll probably never know it. But that's okay. That's more than okay. That's everything. The story of Dean Martin and Johnny Carson is more than a celebrity anecdote. It is a timeless map to our shared humanity. It screams a quiet truth. Our greatest acts of heroism are often unconscious. Our most profound connections are often unspoken. In a world that prizes visibility and broadcasted virtue, Their story is a testament to the saving grace of simple, hidden presence. So check on your friend who seems fine, smile at the stranger who seems alone. Your simple, human presence is a force you cannot measure. You never know whose lifeline you are or who might be silently holding yours. As Dean and Johnny proved on a night in 1963 and again in 1988, sometimes just showing up, broken, afraid, and real, is enough to save a world.